Uh, Hold on.
You're good to go, Robert.
Good morning. My name is Robert Code. Sergeant Major retired, recently retired from the Army, and I am honored to be here as part of this session for MBA today. And I'm going to go and give you a quick run of show, and then I'll introduce all of our panelists. For our section, the issue of veteran homelessness is one largely informed by race, ethnicity, racial and ethnicity. Despite making just 18% of the general veteran population, over 43% of veterans experience homelessness are veterans of color. This overrepresentation of racial and ethnic minorities is the result of many factors, such as deep mental and physical health disparities, economic instability, and inability to assess services necessary to stabilize before homelessness occurs. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues and we look to future, racial equality will need to be the foundational strategy for combating veteran homelessness. Join us as we open dialogue about the historical inequalities that contributed to higher rates of homelessness for racial and ethnic minority veterans, the impacts of race and ethnicity on access, experiences of service providers on the ground, and tools and solutions for better serving the entire veteran community moving forward. I will now introduce our phenomenal panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sean Liu. He is a community engagement coordinator with the HVA Homeless Programs Offices, which is responsible for the development of strategic communications and partnerships to enforce efforts to prevent and end homelessness across veterans and their families. He also supports the development and the implementation of nationwide policies, guidelines, and technical assistance for a variety of VA homeless programs and initiatives, including integrating homeless programs to VA nationwide suicide prevention efforts, implementing racial equality throughout VHA specialty homeless services, and evaluating communities seeking federal confirmation of achieving the active end of veteran homelessness. This summer marked Sean's 13th year working with the VA. Sean holds a BA in psychology, a Master of Social Work, and is a licensed clinical social worker with the state of Florida.
How's it going, Robert? It's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
Good morning. Welcome. Welcome. All right. Next, I would like to introduce Catherine Monet. Catherine is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. In this role, she focuses on the execution of strategic policy and technical assistance agenda and expanding strategic partnerships to more effectively end veteran homelessness. Catherine has spent over a decade in the public and nonprofit sector working to address housing instability and homelessness among veterans. Prior to joining, she was the National Alliance to End Homelessness, focusing on the promotion of data-driven, evidence-based interventions to end homelessness, particularly among veterans. Catherine holds a Master's of Public Administration and a Bachelor's of Science in Diplomacy and International Relations. Catherine currently serves as the VA Advisory Committee for Homeless Veterans and the U.S. Vets DC Advisory Council and the Board of Directors on the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So good morning, Catherine.
Good morning. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, welcome. And our final panelist will be Monique Brown. Monique is a 26-year veteran of the U.S. Army. During her career, Monique was deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and twice to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. In 2013, Monique retired medically from the Army. Since her time in the military, Monique worked as a Veterans Outreach Specialist at El Centro de la Raza and the founder director of FOB Hope. In 2016, Monique created FOB Hope, Forward Operating Base, commonly referred to as FOB. FOB Hope collects and distributes personal care items to homeless veterans who live in places that are not meant for human habitation. So good morning, Monique.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I also hold a master's in nonprofit leadership and a bachelor's in criminal justice.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. And my apologies for leaving out your
It's
academic.
okay. I worked hard for those, man. I got to mention them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So welcome, panelists. I will move right on to our first question. So each of you work on issues of veteran homelessness in different capacities, localities, and see it through different lenses. Can you share with us about your work and what area of focus and what your area of focus is? So to kind of keep the flow going, we'll keep this order since it's an all panel question. We'll start out with Sean, move to Catherine, and then go over to Monique. So Sean, over to you.
Great, thanks, Robert. Hey, everyone again. So I have the pleasure of having maybe one of the most eclectic portfolios of different projects and initiatives that I get to participate in with the Veterans Health Administration's Homeless Programs Office. So I work at the national level, and many of you who are maybe veteran advocates or users of VA services are probably familiar that we have a couple of different tiers. We have a national level, we have a regional level made up of veterans integrated service networks, and then the local level populated by medical centers all throughout the country, all 50 states, including US territories like Puerto Rico and Guam and US Virgin Islands. So I get to participate in a lot of different efforts to help prevent and end veteran homelessness. Some of the ones, Robert, you mentioned that I'm really, really proud to participate with. Really helping to integrate our homeless programs efforts into VA's broader suicide prevention efforts, acknowledging that homelessness and housing instability are risk factors for veteran suicide. As you also mentioned, I get to be part of the interagency review team with our good friends and colleagues over at the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the United States Interagency Council, evaluating communities that are seeking to get federal confirmation for achieving an effective end to veteran homelessness. To date, 82 communities, including 3 whole states, have achieved an effective end to veteran homelessness. And we want that number to increase steadily. So we're really excited about that. But the big one that I'm really, really proud of, especially over the last year and a half or so, is our national work for racial equity. This is a really, really important topic for all of us, given the stats, Robert, that you just shared, that homelessness impacts veterans of color dramatically more than other demographics. And so for us to make that number of communities achieving an effective end of veteran homelessness go up, for us to actually do the thing and end veteran homelessness nationwide, we have to look at homelessness and our services through a racial equity lens. So I'm really, really excited that I get to be part of that work with a fantastic work group and a fantastic team of representatives all across the country. And I'm excited to share a little bit later today about what we've been doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. Catherine?
So I'm Catherine Monet, and as you heard, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. I'll tell you a little bit about what NCHV does, because I do think that it's important to help frame the conversation. And NCHV was founded back in 1990 at a time when veterans were about 1 in 4 of the homeless population. And so we were really founded out of a sense of disparity, right? And a sense of thinking about the fact that there weren't any real dedicated resources for veterans experiencing homelessness, except for at the Department of Labor at the time. There was like 1 or 2 very small VA programs, but the whole infrastructure that you kind of see at VA didn't really exist when NCHV was founded. And so we were founded by a group of service providers to kind of build out a national infrastructure and think about how to close gaps for veterans experiencing homelessness, what kind of programs were needed, and how we could kind of make the situation better. So when we started as a very tiny organization with like next to no budget and next to no staff, right? They kind of started with advocacy because that was the easy lift. And so they were very timely in that McKinney-Vento bill was passing, creating a lot of the HUD homeless programs. And so they were able to insert a couple of the very first programs at VA for veterans specifically experiencing homelessness. And we've sort of been continuing on those efforts and have had our fingerprints on most every VA program, I think, experiencing homelessness, and a lot of policy changes that have resulted in really great benefits for veterans who are facing housing instability. As an organization, we also provide technical assistance and training to organizations across the country that are engaging in this work to help them figure out how to break through their barriers, collaborate better with other partners, and do their work just a little bit more efficiently and effectively. We have a toll-free referral line, 1-800-VET-HELP, that has been around for a long time, I think since even before VA has had its homeless veterans hotline. but we basically are able to connect veterans in a housing crisis to service providers on the ground in their community as they need help. And interestingly, we've seen about a 40% uptick in calls since the pandemic has started. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in today's panel. And the last thing that we really focus in on is creating a sufficient pipeline of veteran affordable housing. And this is kind of a new stream of work that we've been able to do in partnership with the Home Depot Foundation. And they've been really generous with their time and their resources with us to help create resources and toolkits for communities to better take advantage of existing funding streams and create new ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. Monique, over to you.
All right, thank you. Hi, Robert, thanks. So Bob Hope was, like you said, like Robert said, started in 2016, but in 15, I was working at El Centro de la Raza and noticed that there was a gap in services while I was doing the outreach. There were many veterans who decided that they didn't want to go into shelter. And if you've ever been to a shelter, you kind of would know why. But they started saying, you know, could you just get me a sleeping bag and a tent? So I started collecting those items and delivering them, and then started collecting cold and wet weather gear because we're up here in the Pacific Northwest. And that became kind of my in, you know, for working with veterans. So I continued to do that and then started Fob Hope. We're boots on ground out there in the bushes, in the parks, under the freeway, looking for our veterans, no matter what their race, but focusing on veterans of color because we are an underserved population. Fob Hope also has a couple of other programs, incarcerated women veterans at Purdy Prison who are in the vet pod. We help them when they exit prison. So we give them the basic needs for living in an apartment. We provide them with cash so they have some money for food. And then we support them on their first couple of weeks, taking them to appointments and getting driver's licenses and getting IDs and all that kind of stuff. And then our other program is called Pathfinder Coordinator. It's a contract with King County. And basically I train others to do the outreach work, give them the best practices and provide them with information and updated benefits. And I guess that's it. We'll talk later about more, I guess, but that's kind of the scale of Fob Hope.
Awesome, panelists. Thank you so much for that. So we'll move on to our second question, and this is going to go out to Catherine. So Catherine, racial and ethnic minority veterans are overrepresented among the population of veterans experiencing homelessness on any given night. What are some of the reasons for this?
So that's a really great question. And I want to back up a little bit and expand the aperture because I do think one of the most common questions I get is, why are people even homeless in the first place, right? And so I want to start there and kind of dive down into inequities, if that's all right. So when you think about homelessness, right, I mean, there are so many causes, but at its very core, homelessness is really a fundamental mismatch between the availability of affordable housing in any one community's housing market and an individual in that community's ability to pay for housing. So there are some systemic factors when you think about the fact that the average rental price has increased by about 66% in the last decade, right? And the federal minimum wage has been what it has been since 2009, right? So I think that's one big thing. But then when you look at some of the individual issues, you think about un or underemployment, you think about mental health challenges, you think about substance use challenges, other family issues and justice involvement and a whole assortment. So then when you think about how those factors really interplay with race and ethnicity, right? You do see higher rates when it comes to risk factors, including, for example, the characterization of your discharge from the military, justice involvement and the ways in which people of color tend to be over-policed and over-targeted by the justice system. The unemployment rate for Black veterans is actually higher right now than it is for white veterans or other veteran populations. And then you also see things like lower rates when you're thinking about just income and your earnings that you take home, disability claims, award rates, or even awards or denials, right? And these are all things where systemic and institutional bias and racism plays a role. But I think one key thing to note, right, is that when you're in a situation where you're not able to afford your basics, right, most of us will say, hey, mom or dad, or hey, cousin down the way, or hey, neighbor or family or friend, right? Like you have a network of people that you normally rely on for support, but that's not always a possibility for folks who are racial and ethnic minorities. And there's this really great organization up in Massachusetts called the Center for Social Innovation. And they've really looked at this phenomenon called network impoverishment, where in short, the network that you might normally rely on to help when you're facing some kind of like a shortage or I guess an issue with your financial situation or like financial liquidity. And your network, basically, your whole network in that situation is a network that might not actually have capital to lend you. So in short, Black and veterans of color may not actually have a network to rely upon if you have an $800 car repair bill and need your car to get to work, or something of that nature. And so I think to some degree that really exacerbates the ability for a small challenge or a small setback to really lead to a major crisis in your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information, Catherine, and for sharing the additional resources that are available for our veterans out there. So the next question I have will be for Sean. So Sean, even before COVID, racial and ethnic minority veterans were already more likely to experience homelessness than their white counterparts. In what ways has the pandemic exacerbated the situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you, Robert. I want to also follow Catherine's suit and maybe take a step back a little bit and just talk about the general pre-COVID trends, specifically for veterans from minority populations, racial and ethnic groups in particular. We've definitely seen in our data that our veterans experiencing homelessness from those minority populations are increasing in proportion. But what we think is going on with our data is that's actually following just the general trends in veteran populations as a whole, that as veterans as an entire group become more diverse, it then kind of necessarily follows that those other trends for minority veterans also entering into homelessness follow suits as well. We haven't seen too much in our data just yet over the trends of that increasing proportionality due to things other than kind of the general diversifying of the veteran population. So that's kind of the trends prior to COVID. Now, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been a lot of factors that have contributed to the kind of the general instability for veterans of color. These are things that you probably know intuitively and may have even experienced. Housing instability due to financial hardship, lack of unemployment, food insecurity as well is huge. Now, when we think about the impact of the pandemic on veteran homeless, though, we have to kind of like talk about kind of a midpoint away in regards to evictions, right? So that's kind of, for many veterans, the kind of precursor along the way. You experience housing instability, you may experience an eviction or a foreclosure. And then, as Catherine mentioned, depending on the quality of your network, you might actually be able to rely on different supports before you end up becoming homeless. Now, some of the things that I kind of want to acknowledge, this is a little bit unsatisfying in terms of a response, is that as a country, we really don't have good data yet that talks on the likelihood of entering into homelessness following eviction, right? However, just because we don't have good data on that doesn't mean there's nothing that we can do. We actually have a lot of resources in regards to both homelessness prevention and eviction prevention as well. Definitely since at least July, the federal government has been doing an all-out push to make sure that renters across the country know of the historic amounts of rental assistance that is out there. Specifically, we encourage you to check out the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau's Rental Assistance Finder. You can Google it. I may also try to just pop that into the chat as well, so that if you or a veteran that you know are experiencing financial instability, please, please, please reach out to get that assistance. And then when we think about veterans entering into homelessness as well, we're also essentially, because we're still in the pandemic, and a lot of the things that we consider those upstream factors, unemployment, financial instability, food insecurity, network impoverishment, and then eviction, it might actually take several more months to actually, for somebody in those circumstances, to enter into homelessness. So in terms of the data, it's still kind of out there for those two main reasons. The pandemic is still going on. And also it's going to take a little bit of time for the impacts of that to be reflective in kind of our homelessness data. But again, just because we're waiting for the data to win out doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can do today. There are, to make sure that veterans experiencing housing instability and homelessness get connected to those resources.
Outstanding, Sean. Thank you so much for that. And it's great to see all the different resources out there to assist veterans in getting that financial aid that they need. So I greatly appreciate you providing that to our wonderful attendees today. My next question will be for Monique. So Monique, you work with veterans on the ground in the Puget Sound region. Can you tell us a little bit about Fob Hope and some of the barriers that racial minority veterans you work with are facing when trying to access services, benefits, and housing?
So one of the things Sean just mentioned is about benefits, and many people of color I notice that I work with are not aware of the benefits they have. I'm not sure why that is, that our white counterparts know the benefits and people of color don't, but that occurs. A lot of the barriers are around housing. We find the veteran and we try to refer them to get into housing. If they happen to get a HUD-VASH voucher, it is difficult to use that voucher. One, because of the dollar amount on it, not enough for these times if you have a lack of income. But the other is because of the narrative about the Black man, right? The dangerous Black man, the dangerous person of color. Many people don't want to take those vouchers and have them living in their apartments. So that is one of the issues I see. Also, lack of income. If we help find them a place to get into and we pay the first and last, they don't have the income to sustain it. A lot of that has to do with COVID and the service industry. Many people of color are in the service industry. And if, COVID shut down a lot of those places where people in the service industry work. So that has been a new challenge since COVID. And then criminal records are a huge problem. We know that people of color are arrested more than others. And so when they have a criminal record and you're trying to get them into housing, it's also a barrier to be able to get them housed.
That's definitely unfortunate. And of course, we all know that social dynamic and how difficult it is for persons of color to be represented and be able to recover from some of those injustices. So Monique, thank you for sharing that with us. My next question will be over to Sean. So Sean, what work is the VA doing to better understand and tailor solutions to address the disparities that exist for veterans of color in housing and homelessness programs?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question. We're really excited about the work that we've been putting together over the last year to really make an impact for our veterans of color. There are two main initiatives that I want to mention. One is a kind of a top-down initiative, and the other is a bottom-up one. So we're kind of approaching it from two different directions. The first one, a top-down initiative, you mentioned in kind of the bio, I'm a social worker by trade. In healthcare, like in many other professions, before you actually start doing a treatment plan, you got to figure out what's going on, right? You got to diagnose the problem. So what we're doing over this next year, this next fiscal year, from now probably until about July, August of 2022, we're doing a large-scale homeless programs-wide organizational assessment to essentially get a baseline understanding of our current effectiveness in doing racial equity and surfacing opportunities for improvement. We anticipate that a lot of the improvements that will be generated from the findings of our assessment will be done from big picture policy levels. But to do so, we're going through a variety of different activities. We're doing a massive review of our current directives, handbooks, memoranda, grants that have been going out to get an understanding of what our current policy documents are. And then we're going out into the world to figure out how we've been doing. We're going to be talking to staff, veterans, stakeholders across the country in a variety of different ways to essentially synthesize all of this information and generate concrete policy improvements that we can do going forward. So that's kind of the top-down approach. The second one is a bottom-up approach. We have launched a homeless programs-wide improvement initiative, a data-driven quality improvement initiative, so that our local medical centers, our homeless programs in your communities, the boots on the ground doing the work on a day-to-day basis, they can review their systems and improve it to ensure equitable access and outcomes for veterans served. We're doing this from a data-driven perspective. We've actually also developed an internal dashboard that takes a lot of our existing performance measures, things that you care about as veterans and as taxpayers for our services, such as whether or not veterans are leaving our programs or are getting connected to permanent housing while in our programs. Things like whether or not they're able to access income through employment, things such as whether or not they're finding value in the services that we provide. So we've been able for years to take a look at these different kind of measures, these different goals as a whole. But what's new for this initiative is disaggregating that by race and ethnicity so that we can see how all veterans of those different subpopulations are doing towards those goals, so that we can then figure out more about their unique circumstances, their unique challenges, so that we can then provide targeted improvement strategies, no more of this treating everybody the same, targeted improvement strategies addressing their unique barriers and challenges so that they can all achieve the same outcomes that we want for permanent housing, for employment, for overall wellness and holistic well-being. So that we're viewing as a bottom up. So instead of kind of viewing it as big picture policy, we're actually going to our medical centers and empowering them with data and quality improvement principles so that they can work on their local systems to make these changes happen. We're really, really excited. I hope at some point in the next year or two, we have some really positive results that I can report back to all of you.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Sean. So moving over to Monique. Monique, prior to working at Five Hope, you were the Veterans Outreach Coordinator for El Centro de la Raza, the Center for People of All Races. Can you share with us some strategies you developed to reach the veterans that most can't? Do you adopt a culturally informed approach in your work?
So when I started at El Centro, I didn't even know Veterans Outreach existed. So I learned a lot going there. One of the first things I learned is that people on the street don't trust you. As an outreach worker, they do not trust you. So many people have come out and told them, you know, we're going to do this and that for you, and then they don't show up and do this and that. So it causes them to lose trust in those who are supposed to be helping. So that's the first thing I did, was try to learn how to build trust, which means I've got to come out and visit them more than just once. I've got to call them sometimes and check on them and see if there's things they need. I also carry on hand basic necessities. So I have snacks in my van, I have socks, I have boots, I have backpacks, I have tents, sleeping bags, cold and wet weather gear. I travel around with that always, because if somebody needs something and I hand it to them right now, then that gives me some credibility as a person who's going to come back and help. And then if I follow up with them in a week, that gives me a little more credibility. So continuing to follow up with them and give them what they need right away is helpful. Also speaking with the veteran, not at the veteran. You know, you've got to be on the same level. You can't come out to the street and act like you're getting ready to come save somebody, right? You have to understand that they're in a stressful situation, and that even if they act crazy with you, talk to you any kind of way, that they're in crisis mode. So you just remain calm and continue to speak to them and try to, you know, build some kind of camaraderie there. Speaking of camaraderie, as a veteran, I'm able to build some trust, right? Because I understand the service, the sacrifice. I understand the racism that goes on in the military. So I'm able to speak with them in that regard. Also, I learned that you got to dress the part. I'll never forget, I was at a shelter and I had on a real starched up dress shirt, pair of jeans, and dress shoes. And I was thinking, okay, I'm cool because I got the jeans on, right? But this guy came to me and said, if you would take off your starched dress shirt and those dress shoes and come down to our level, we might trust you. And so it was that moment that I learned you cannot go out there looking like a service provider. You've got to go out there and be able to meet them where they are. So you got to dress the part. And then in terms of culturally informed, absolutely, I am the culturally informed, right? I am a Black woman, lesbian, veteran. So, and my team is a lot of veterans and people of color. So we are able to just connect on that level, and then ensuring that we are thinking about culture and race in everything we do, understanding that if one of our veterans gets turned down for something, it just may be because of their color. And so how do we react to that? What do we do to make it work for them?
Monique, that is so awesome. And it is very true about being authentic in your approach and having that realization that you got to meet veterans where they are. Because again, once that trust has been given away, it's really hard for them to build that trust back. So thank you for that and your efforts. So next question is going to be for Catherine. So Catherine, In your organization, you released a report recently titled Policing and Punishment-Based Approaches, a really expensive way to make homelessness worse. In it, you outline the police or punishment-based approaches to homelessness exacerbate racism, exclusion, and bias. Can you tell us more about what this means?
Absolutely. So NCHV was actually a part of drafting and releasing this report in conjunction with the National Coalition for Housing Justice, which is really a coalition of national advocates and organizations that are really focused on creating a vision that leads to a fundamentally different housing market in America, where everyone, no matter their race, color, gender, religion, anything, has access to safe and stable housing. And I think one of the things that's important to realize, to contextualize this a little bit, is that there are a growing number of cities that have resorted to the use of law enforcement to address publicly visible symptoms of homelessness. So our statement really starts off as condemning that, right? Because it's very easy, I guess, to spend a lot of your homelessness funding on law enforcement and policing poverty, as opposed to actually addressing its underlying root causes. And so there are many cities across America where the budget for policing and criminalizing poverty, meaning, putting people in jails or giving out fines for sitting outside or sleeping outside or panhandling or anti-camping or whatever it may be, is actually more costly than putting people in housing or offering them the supports that they need. So that was sort of the genesis of why that statement got put out. But when you look at the ways in which, I guess, criminalization of homelessness really impacts people, right? It's not just that it's more expensive and it's a costly non-solution to a problem that privileged, I'm trying to say this nicely and I'm failing. But I think that there are a lot of privileged people who don't like to see visible homelessness and are afraid of homeless people. I'm just going to be blunt. I'm sorry, y'all. And I think that cities and communities often respond to that privileged fear and that desire to not have poor people outside on the streets, but they don't always do that in a productive way. And when you think about, the ways in which that actually can harm people, right? We know that Black people are overrepresented in the population for veterans and civilians. We know, for example, that police are a lot more likely to brutalize Black people and treat them differently than they might treat a white person, right? For example. And we know that people with intersectional identities oftentimes are even more vulnerable both to homelessness, criminalization, and all of the consequences. But when you think about what actually happens, right, to the person who has to deal with this, you think about the fact that now they've got a criminal record potentially, right? They've got all these fines and all of this just additional challenge stacked up against them. That makes it so much harder to find employment in the future. It makes it so much harder to get safe housing in the future, because now when a future landlord's doing a background check, they're like, oh, well, you've got this record. What happened to you? And it's just that you didn't have enough money to live in a house in the first place. And it just kind of exacerbates and creates this weird circle of poverty and downward spiral that is counterproductive for everyone involved. And so I think to that end, right, there are solutions that we do think that communities should be focused on. And there are solutions that actually address the issues, not just hide them and force people to move around and ultimately suffer because someone is uncomfortable with having a homeless person outside, but not uncomfortable enough to actually find a real solution for them.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. And that is a real challenge for some people to understand that, homeless vets aren't there to always be that downtrodden that they think is representative. So it's really hard for communities to accept that. And we do have to be able to foster a way to change that mentality on that. And it's of course, it's going to be a challenge, but we as a people have to be unified and work together. So thank you for that. So my final question will go back out to all the panelists. How can we best prepare to meet the moment ahead? What type of policy changes, systemic reforms, or programs need to be implemented to make a dent in the housing crisis for veterans of color? So I'll keep that same order as before. So Sean, over to you.
Yeah, This is a fantastic way to cap off the session. You know, I think in terms of, I'm going to approach this from two angles. I think in terms of policy reforms, I think, you know, we're really talking about what Monique had mentioned earlier, access to housing, the creation and development of more affordable housing, but also that's housing that's accessible to our veterans of color. We're really excited about our partners at HUD and the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness with their House America initiative, really excited for the affordable housing that's going to be generated there. We're also talking about other changes in access that make our services more inclusive. Earlier this year, we actually expanded the eligibility for, actually Congress expanded the eligibility for the HUD VASH program, one of our signature permanent housing programs, to include veterans with other than honorable discharges. I'm going to butcher the details a little bit, so I'm going to let more smarter people talk about that. But things in that direction are critical, not just expanding access for, but specifically focused on addressing those individual barriers to these critical services. So more like that. But the other angle that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit is the kind of more interpersonal one. The work of race equity in particular has been some of the most emotionally fraught work that I've had the privilege of working on to date. And so I want to kind of like invite all of us to remember kind of our collective humanity. So whether you're a service provider, you're an advocate, you're an interested member of the community, you're a veteran receiving services yourself, we all kind of need to take moments to make sure that, you know, did you hydrate today? Did you eat something? Did you sleep well last night? Are you getting some good exercise? I have had the most, you know, again, fraught conversations of doing the work of specifically making our services more equitable. And because of the psychic energy that it demands, being our best selves going forward is critical. So I would be remiss, in addition to all the big picture policy stuff, to make sure that we're, you know, kind of our best humans as we go through this work.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Sean. Catherine, over to you.
So I'm definitely going to +1 on affordable housing. And I'm just going to point out for folks who are, you know, maybe interested in what Congress is doing, that the Build Back Better Act has a whole lot of money in it for Section 8 vouchers, the Housing Trust Fund to develop more affordable housing. And that bill is hanging out. So if you're someone who likes to talk to your members of Congress, you should really go and let them know that we would like that bill so that we can support more veterans exiting homelessness. I think the other thing that I do want to raise, though, as something that is important, is that it's not only important to think about equity in terms of equity within VHA's homeless programs, and I think that VHA has been doing a really great job at leading in our field on that, but there are still all of these inequities that cause veterans of color to fall into homelessness at a higher rate than other veterans. And I do think that to some degree, right? I mean, the Homeless Programs Office and all of the grantees across the country don't get to choose who shows up, right? I mean, it's important to make sure that outcomes are equitable and that we're serving people in the very best culturally appropriate way that we possibly can. But at the end of the day, we really do need to be working upstream and thinking about how equity is looking in all of these other upstream systems, whether it's, you know, Department of Defense discharging folks, or you know, the Veterans Benefits Administration and the ways in which we're dealing with home loans, or CMP, or, you know, the entire ecosystem of services and benefits that a veteran touches. And so I do think to some degree, there needs to be more looking at equity in a really disciplined way, VA-wide. Government-wide too.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Catherine. And then now, Monique, over to you.
All right, thank you. So there are three things that I am interested in this subject here. The criminalization of homelessness is a huge issue here in Washington. They're still voting on whether to criminalize homelessness in one of these areas, right? And so if you're a veteran out there on the street and you don't have a record, but they criminalize homelessness, and now you've gotten some ticket or been arrested because you're loitering someplace, then now you've got a record, right? So this is criminalizing people because they don't have homes just doesn't make sense to me. So that's got to be out of the door. The other thing is the media, the narrative that is pushed about homeless folks. I've watched many programs where the narrative is drug addicts, mental health issues, alcoholics, and that's the reason why there's homelessness. There are so many stories out there on the street that we have got to be able to change the narrative about homelessness. If you keep saying that if the media keeps saying that there's drug addicts and alcoholics, and it's about choices that people made. And that is not always the case. I met a man who got in a car accident with his entire family. He was driving his van. The family died. He was the only surviving person. And that's why he became an alcoholic. So there are stories behind all those drug addicts and alcoholics, the mental health issues. And then there are stories behind other folks who just couldn't afford to pay for their home. So I think that narrative really needs to be changed. The other thing is small nonprofits. We struggle so hard to get the funding to do the work, and we're right here on the ground. I saw in the chat people mentioning Wounded Warrior Project. I love them. I worked for them. They took care of their employees as well as they took care of the folks who utilize the services. But they're a huge nonprofit, and they get that money based on who's leading that nonprofit. When you see this 5'3" studly Black woman come into a room and try to get money to do what she's got to do on the street, it's difficult. And there are many small nonprofits like me. And I think that that's got to be a change. It's got to be made easier to be able to get the money for the people who are right here on the ground, face to face with those living homeless.
Thank you so much, Monique. And that was a very pivotal point you just made about shifting the narrative, because we all know, especially in today's hypersensitive society, once you're able to label something, in most cases, once that label is placed on them, you now devalue that person. So if it's always synonymous that homelessness equates to alcoholism or drug addiction, that's just going to fester and permeate in someone's mind that there's nothing but negativity out there. So that is gravely unfortunate, and we do have to find a way to shift that narrative more publicly on a widespread podium. So thank you so much. So I believe that is all the questions we have for everyone so far. I noticed in the chat we've had a lot of questions and comments coming into the chat, so please keep those coming, and our panelists will do their best to get the information out to you. As you should have seen in the chat as well, there are ways to reach out and contact the panelists. So panelists, again, just so everyone has it up front, maybe provide them ways to contact you so they can continue to grow their network of resources and also have a way to give back to you and also center you for your questions. I guess we have just a few more moments. So before we close out, I'll do a quick round table, and I'll start out with Sean and see if you have any last minute takeaways from the session that you would like to provide. So Sean, over to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks. Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate you leading this panel as well. You've done a fantastic job. So super appreciative. You know, there's a lot of interest in the chat. There's a lot of folks who want to get connected and stay plugged in. If you're curious about the work that we're doing here at VA and the Homeless Programs Office, invite you to visit us online, va.gov/homeless, va.gov/homeless. There you're going to find a lot of information, whether you're a veteran searching for services, whether you're a service provider who wants to partner with us, whether you're just an interested person who wants to get plugged in. A lot of great resources there as well. Again, va.gov/homeless. I'm also going to drop it in the chat. The work of racial equity is tough. And as my kind of former boss, who's now the interim director of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, Anthony Love, he used to tell me, the work of equity never goes at anyone's pace. For those who have been waiting so long, it's too damn slow. For those who might, be impacted by it in a negative way, it's a little bit too fast, but the work is important. So we really, really appreciate, on behalf of the Homeless Programs Office, your particular interest in this. And then we're excited about the work that we're going to do together.
Outstanding. Thank you. Catherine, over to you for any last minute takeaways.
I think I just appreciate the partnership, not only from everyone on this panel and our partners at MVA, but from everyone who made the time on a Sunday morning, right, to come and listen to us talk about race and equity and veteran homelessness. I mean, I don't know, I love the weekend, but the fact that y'all are here is lifting my spirits and making me feel a lot better about this work, because I think I agree, right? Sean says it's hard. It is. Everyone knows it's hard. It's exhausting at times, and joyful at times too, right? And so I think I'm just thankful for everyone's partnership in this work to help us move this body of work forward for veterans who don't need to be facing these challenges, shouldn't be.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. And Monique, over to you.
Yes, I want to run back to the last question real quick, because I totally forgot when I talked about criminalizing homelessness. You know, next month we will be opening an encampment here in Tacoma, Washington, and it is being sanctioned by Tacoma, the city of Tacoma. They are actually providing the infrastructure. This helps with people not getting tickets for sleeping in a park or sleeping in a doorway. This helps with people not having their stuff taken away because they get to relax, leave their stuff in their tent and know that somebody is there watching it, that no one will steal it. And then they can go off and try to get work and be able to, you know, start moving towards getting back into society the way that they would like to. And so I think that, you know, advocating for sanctioned encampments is important for everyone. Last thing I want to say, I put in the chat though that you can reach me at mbrown@fobhope.org, and you can check out the website fobhope.org. And just, you know, if anyone on this call is dealing with directly veterans and feels like sometimes that they're being too aggressive or too angry when you're dealing with them, understand that these folks are right now, when they're in your face, in crisis. And so they may come off some type of way, but you have to always remember that they are in crisis right now. You get to go home and lay in your bed, in your warm bed. You get to walk to the refrigerator and get food anytime you want. But these folks can't do that. So if you're feeling like, oh, they're too aggressive. I remember a person got kicked out of an office because they were a bit pumped up. And I said, you have to realize this person's in a crisis right now. So just, I mean, we've got to think about homelessness differently than the way we're thinking about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monique. So as we wrap up this panel, I would be remiss if I didn't close out this session with, you know, an impactful quote that, you know, kept me throughout my military career. And I would like to pass it on to you all. And I think if everyone would live by this quote by the great Maya Angelou, as we interact with everyone, it will just always show our authenticity and be more genuine with how we approach people. But Maya Angelou was quoted as saying, you know, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So if we all give back to one another with that same mindset, the world will be a better place. So I'd like to thank all of our great panelists. I'd like to thank everyone behind the scenes that made this effort as seamless as possible for all of us to reach you all on this global scale. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of the MBA seminars and have a wonderful day. Thank you.